I was working as a volunteer for a charitable organisation, and they brought in this huge clock. It was just painted black, the whole thing, the dial, everything. It would have gone into the bin or into the tip. So I took it home and I started lifting off some of the black paint, and I found underneath it was mahogany and brass. And by the time I finished, I had this fabulous clock. Then I started working on the movement, cleaning it up. By the time I finished, it was a life of horology for me, because I just loved it. I loved to see it come back to life. And that's what horology is all about. It's rescuing them, restoring them. And so I devoted my life into learning how to restore them properly, so that it's a restoration, conservation, rather than just an amateur. Very shortly after I started working on them for pleasure, enjoyment, I saw an ad in the paper, and it was just a couple of guys that advertised and said anyone who wants to form a clock society or antique clock restoration club meet at a certain hall at the Museum Theaterette in the city. That was in 1975 and June the 5th. And I thought, yeah, I'll go along to that. So I went along to that, and there was 60 people turned up, and I was one of them, and we became the founding members of the Australian Antiquarian Horological Society that night. Since the 1970s, we've refound horology. It had completely been given up because of the technology change. When we got digital watches in, horology just fell aside, and it was people like myself who trained ourselves, read books, research libraries, and started it all again. And now, of course, we're highly regarded specialists. The AAHS was called in to advise on the Great Telescope of Melbourne from the 1800s, which was once only used by experts. That particular restoration is important because in the future they're hooking it up to your personal PC, and you'll be able to book in maybe 20 minutes and pay a fee and utilise it yourself and actually look around the heavens with it. And that's a very important piece of Victorian history, and I'm very proud to be part of the restoration of it under the direction of Dr. Richard Gillespie. The Brighton Library clock is a very important clock because it's one of the biggest in Australia. It was made by Gaunt. Gaunt was prolific as a manufacturer in Victoria of tower clocks. This is his last clock. It was 1875. It's been working non-stop since, and it gives no trouble at all. I've been looking after it for many years. Here we are inside the clock room itself. We're at the very top of the clock. These are the bevel gearing that drive the hands. They run out to what we call the motion work at either end and go right out to the big dials. There are many, many fabulous clocks I've worked on, but it doesn't come down to how important it is worldwide or Australia-wide. It comes down to how important it is to the person you're working for. I do recall doing a very, very cheap ordinary clock for a lady once, and while I was working on it, I read a name inside it, and I rang the number, and this woman answered it. And I said, well, I'm after Mr. So-and-so. And she said, oh, that would be my grandmother. And I said, just have a listen to this. And I put the phone next to the clock, and I turned the hands around and let it chime. When I took the phone away, that lady was crying her eyes out, and she said, I remember that from my childhood. See, that's what clocks are all about. They're living history. They live through families. And when people love them, you do your best job on them, and you treat everyone as seriously as the next. And so you get a great thrill if someone loves the clock because you did it up for them. It's great to bring it back into life and give it back to that family.